Hello and welcome to the Property Roundup here on iProperty Radio with myself, Carol Talon. Today I'm delighted to be chatting to Paul Sheridan, Director of Main Contracting and Civil Engineering Services with the CIF. And Paul has recently been appointed as one of the newest judges to the Business Post National Property Awards for 2025. Paul, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Good afternoon, Carol, and thank you for having me on.
Well, I'm delighted to join or to welcome you onto iProperty Radio, but equally I'm delighted to be welcoming you to the judging panel of the Business Post Property Awards. This is one of the premier events for the property industry for the year. And we tend to get excited around award season, but actually I think when the marketplace is quite tough, it's where we really want to see good news stories celebrated, good projects celebrated. So first of all, tell me a little bit, Paul, about the work you do as Director of Main Contracting and Civil Engineering Services within the CIF.
Well, look, I suppose just to start off, I'm delighted to be a judge, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of the entries, particularly around refurbish and redevelopment, but also the tech property award. I mean, there's a lot of technological innovation going on. There's an awful lot of talk about life cycle costing for assets and maintaining your investment over the long term. It'd be great to see the type of entries there. But in terms of my own role with the Construction Industry Federation, I suppose there's two main areas. One is to deal with the Master Builders and Contractors Association. A lot of those members and construction contractors that would build commercial office space, hotels, schools, hospitals, and so forward. And then on the other side of it, it's the real heavy infrastructure and civil engineering, which the roads, the bridges, the Lewis lines, the bus connects corridors, the major motorways, ports, and so forth. So it's a very interesting area. There's a lot going on in this space. I suppose our key area at the moment is really trying to get government to see the importance and the necessity of greater investment and more sustainable long-term investment on a multi-annual basis in infrastructure. I would dare say that we no longer have necessarily a housing problem per se, but more it's a symptom of an infrastructural deficit that we have. A key area would be water and wastewater. That's a real focus for us at the moment. Without pipes in the ground, you can't build houses, we can't build factories, our FDI will be undermined. So we need to really start delivering more. And I would say if you're asking for a number, we'd be looking for Ishgaren to be investing 500 million extra in new capital delivery. Now that'd be ring fenced for new capital delivery, not for operational purposes. That's required. Otherwise, our housing targets are simply not going to be achievable. But the industry has the capability and capacity to do it. And we will work in partnership with government to get it done. But, I suppose the whole challenge then is general infrastructure, which I spoke about already. People often think about a bridge, but a school and a transportation hub are as critical to housing and FDI as a hospital. So that's other types of infrastructure we need to see greater investment in and more continuity.
Paul, I think it's a really good way to position it there that actually we've almost moved past. It feels like we've been talking about a housing crisis for so long that that's almost not the issue. It's like the old adage, it's never about what it's about. At this point, that has essentially become the system or the symptom of what has been not just recent, but really decades of a lag. But there was a whole lost decade in terms of infrastructure. But if you look across the regions, I would say that that's more than a decade of lost infrastructure delivery. So realistically, from where we're starting now, I appreciate what you said there about kind of the $500 million towards Ishka and for new capital development. But in terms of where we're starting from, that wouldn't be enough at all. So what do you expect our incoming government? We know the programme for government is being negotiated right now. What can the new incoming government do, given the state of infrastructure delivery, particularly across the regions right now, but yet that growing demand for housing, but it needs to be underpinned by, as you say, pipes in the ground. What can they do?
Well, when we talk about 500 million, we mean every year for the foreseeable number of years. That has to be ongoing. You've also got to look at our planning system. It has to be effectively resourced. We need to have those mandatory timelines in place because investors need to know when they can hit the market with their new investment. And that gives them certainty, particularly if you're a pharmaceutical company and you need to know when you want to bring your product to market. You have to get that right. But it's right now the planning system is really preventing major infrastructure being delivered. We have the planning bill that's coming through, but we need a timeline for the enactment and that of that. And you also need to see probably improvements to the whole funding mechanism around the delivery of housing. Yeah, maybe more forward funding of some of the schemes.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very difficult for developers to have to wait on cash flow from these schemes at the very end, and they're financing things out of their own books. And if you're doing multi-unit developments and apartments, you really can't access those funds until the whole units are sold. You can't. It's not like a housing estate, so it becomes quite challenging. So
Yeah.
that you've got the planning, you've got the funding side of things, and we need to obviously the implementation of the national planning framework. It's going to be critical, and all of those things are linked into infrastructure delivery.
Hmm.
So it's really really important. And one key aspect for us as contractors and the federation is the reform of public procurement. It's actually how we procure these major projects as well. We need to see greater and accelerated reform around how risk is managed, the how collaboration is encouraged on these projects, greater emphasis on quality and award, and that means sustainability and how we build these things. It's really, really important, and avoidance of disputes on site. So we would be very much aligned with the European Union's recent audit of public procurement, where it states that competition is falling. The rules of procurement are doing the exact opposite of what they're meant to do. Um, you've got the Housing Commission report, which we're very much supportive of in terms of public delivery of housing. And you've got a recent report there by ourselves where it says that up to 50% of the industry are either doing none or very modest levels of public procurement. Why? Because it's too bureaucratic, it's too costly, there's too much of a focus on lowest price and not on quality and delivery. And these
Yeah.
things will make contractors, serious contractors, look twice whether to do public procurement. And we need them because we need to close this deficit. And
Yeah.
yet, many of my members now are reallocating staff and exporting their services into the UK or beyond, particularly those involved in water infrastructure. They're actually moving to the UK. One of my members has laid off 100 staff during the year. One member has allocated 75% of their water staff to the UK. They're expecting a 60 million across 4 or 5 of the members. They're expecting a 60 million euro drop in revenue from Ishka next year, despite the fact that there are hundreds of millions worth of projects ready to go, shovel ready with Ishka. So those things are fundamentally worrying.
Um, Paul, there's a couple of things you've said there actually that I do want to get into a little bit more. So, in terms of the new Planning and Development Act, we're in a funny situation there, kind of timing wise, insofar as the act was pushed through before Christmas and before the dissolution of the Dáil. However, there's a lot of scope for the incoming government as to how they essentially how they enact this, how they interpret this bill, how their senior civil servants within the departments are actually going to interpret the policy. You talked about effective resourcing and the timelines. Do you think the Act in its current form, do you think the Act in terms of mandatory timelines goes far enough for your members?
Look, I think at this point we have a bill. The bill needs to be enacted as soon as possible, alongside the implementation of the national planning framework. We have to move forward. We have what we have now. We need to move forward with it. It's not a panacea. Not everybody is happy per se, but if it provides more guarantee around certainty of pipeline for the industry, well, then that will have to be welcomed, but will remain to be seen.
Okay, resourcing. What would effective resourcing look like
Well, I
for
suppose,
North
look,
and all at this stage, or for our planning system at this stage?
I think as a country, when we look at the public bodies that run many of our essential services like planning, the planning system, it's really important that we start to, I suppose, as a country, adopt the notion that expertise is important
Mhm.
and you need competence in specific areas. And I think that's something that the the government and the bureaucracy that underpins it needs to probably adopt to. And then what I mean by that is that when it's well and good throwing people at a problem, but we need to make sure that we're throwing the right skilled people with the right experience and knowledge of the things they're going to be challenged with. That's really important. And look, we're an industry very similar to other industries in a war for talent, and there are different ways we can do it. One of the real, I suppose, innovations in the last 2 years is the apprenticeship in civil engineering. a professional
Yeah.
apprenticeship. That was a paradigm shift in how to train engineers. We're seeing more of that development in quantity surveying and building surveying. The same mechanism could be adopted for planners. You will actually they'll be earning and learning 4 days working, 1 day developing and learning in a university setting or a technical university setting. So it's a really good way. And when they're finished, they'll be streets ahead of graduates because they'll have got the
Yeah.
experience and the learning at the same time. So that's one way of looking how to do it. But
Yeah.
that's the critical challenge is the skill set.
In terms of upskilling, actually, it's been fantastic. And only this morning, actually, there was a story around the uptake in apprenticeships in 2024 has been the highest in years, which is amazing to see. And it's right that that's being recognised and rewarded, because we have seen these new apprenticeships in, and the nature of apprenticeships is that you don't see that talent come into the industry while it's coming in a training capacity immediately. You don't really see it start to build up in terms of scale and numbers for a couple of years, but it's certainly moving in the right direction. Just in terms of public procurement, because you touched on something there that is massively important, that I think people will know from their experience in the marketplace, but maybe not understand how we got there. And that is around the rules of public procurement are in place to increase competition, and essentially to make working on government projects more accessible to good contractors. And yet that's not what's happening. So can you just explain maybe how that's changed in the last number of years, and maybe why we're seeing more companies move away from that? And by the way, I hadn't heard that stat of, is it 50%
Up
are
to
electing
50% are doing none
not
or
to do that?
very modest levels. Yeah. And we need to change that because it's not sustainable. And the core reasons really, I mean, the European Union enhanced the EU procurement rules about 10 years ago. So they finally did an audit of it, and they discovered that the over bureaucratic nature of tendering for public works, whether it's in Ireland or across the European Union, it's costly. It's there is generally a focus less on value for money and more lowest price. Even though there is mechanisms and legislation there to focus on equality, it's generally not leaned into because it doesn't differentiate enough. Maybe we'll solve that problem when we start to look at embedded carbon and carbon budgeting and life cycle costing in tenders. We might see something, but you've got a system that's now driving contractors away because it's just you see ongoing delays, cancellations of tenders, and when you're a company and you're trying to assess what the next 12 to 24 months will look like, and you're going to look at what clients are we going to work with, what type of work are we going to do, and you see government projects and public procurement projects coming out and consistently getting delayed or cancelled or retendered, and all of that is cost in your books because it's overhead. It costs money to tender for public projects, a lot more than necessarily you will have on a private contract, because you get to work closer earlier with the client. The other thing about public procurement, it's very inflexible. It means you can't actually discuss in detail risk directly with the client. It goes through a very strict tendering process. There's no negotiation. Once the
Mm.
lowest price or whatever the determination factors are for winning that project comes in, that's it. There's no going back to clarify anything. So there's no room for real dialogue to deal with risk during the tender process. Whereas in the private contracts, there are. And what happens then is you get a better management of the risk and a better pricing of that risk premium into contracts. And that's the difference. Public contracts tend to load risk into a competitive lowest price tender and wrap it all up with the actual cost of doing the job. Whereas in the
Yeah.
private, you can tend to tease out the risk premium
Yeah.
and really understand it and have a better way of measuring it and pricing it. And therefore, it's less risky for both the client and the contractor. And that's why contractors are looking around and going, well, I want certainly a pipeline, less delays, less cost to tender, and I can manage the risk better. And therefore, I've got a better commercial outcome to my projects.
So what are the reforms then that your members would be looking for? So are you talking about maybe introducing or having more of a pre-market consultation phase? What would this look like if the reforms that your members need to be able to effectively tender and make this process more competitive?
Well, the four pillars that we spoke about is quality and award, greater collaboration, better risk management, and dispute avoidance. Um, a lot of that in terms of quality and award is done through the procurement process. So what you really want to make sure is that you have objective multi-criteria upon which tenders are evaluated. You want to be able to use building information management in that, carbon tools and measurement, so that you have the capability to quantifiably verify that a tender is better than another. What we need to see is greater flexibility and dialogue earlier in the process, so that you can tease out and risk profile the project and make sure that the party best able to control and manage it is given it. And that's about information. So that means you got to have better quality design, and you want to have more input from the contractors in the design process. Technology is really driving change in the industry. The systems that we use to build things are much more complex. There's much more complex interaction between systems, and that has to be managed earlier. So that's on the quality and award. When you move then into collaboration, that's all about knowledge on both sides. It's competence, it's leadership, it's understanding and knowledge of the contract, how things work on both sides. It's about making sure that there's not just the culture in the industry has to shift, but there are mechanisms that drive those behaviors within the contracts. So, pain gain scenarios, performance rewards. Contractors and clients should be forced to negotiate first before going into a claims process to recover costs. There must be recognition that if a change happens, there may likely be third-party costs. They're not profits. They're third-party costs that the contractor has to cover to make the necessary change. Now, there might be a bit of give and take, but the contract allows for that. So you need better mechanisms, more of what we would call symmetric notice provisions and instructions. So if the contractor has to do something, well, the employer should have to do something on a similar time basis and in a similar way. So there are different things there, but then you're into that risk management. And that's like saying, okay, you cannot have a situation where a client carries out a certain amount of design, produces investigations and reports and surveys, and then tells the contractor, by the way, you're taking responsibility for all these once you sign the contract. Well, I didn't produce those. You did. So you're handing all this background information over to a contractor and then asking to price for that risk without really understanding it or having ownership of it in a competitive 6-week tender process. So they're the type of things we need to see, and we need to see a shift in how design risk is allocated. It should not be fitness for purpose. It doesn't exist. You can't insure for it. And then when you get on dispute avoidance, that goes back to that cooperation. You want to make sure that you've got active dispute avoidance on sites. You're walking the sites together. They might have a standing conciliators down there and making sure that, look, if there's an issue arising, what's the best way to solve this in the interests of delivering on the project? And that ties back to collaboration. So those are things. Now, we've produced an updated strategy for the improved delivery of public infrastructure. Big element that is obviously pipeline, multi-annual funding, but it does summate all of those recommendations under pre-contract, contract, and post-contract and dispute avoidance. It's a report. We'll be publishing it this week, and then hopefully it will clarify what's the issue, what does good look like, and why. And that's our way of showing and giving a vision for success.
That seems very straightforward and infinitely sensible. So where's the resistance to this?
Well, I suppose, and diplomatic as possibly about this. I mean, you have to acknowledge that the OGB have made progress. They have brought in the price variation mechanisms. They have brought in caps on liability over the years, but the reform is quite slow. It sometimes does get into a bureaucratic governance process within the departments. And I would suggest that there's probably muscle memory from the crash where there's a misalignment between what is speculative construction and what is construction infrastructure and delivery of infrastructure and how it should be done. I suppose there must be recognition for that construction is a long-term management of risk and logistics. And sometimes it can span terms of government. And a lot of things can happen. Nobody saw Brexit coming. Nobody saw COVID, and nobody saw the Ukraine. Every one of those has an impact on supply of materials and goods, the productivity on sites, and the cost. That's so, so when you're looking at construction projects and major infrastructure projects, you have to factor in, we are managing risk here. We are not buying laptops that are coming out of a factory. We're dealing with long-term risk, and anything can change during the periods of construction or design or planning.
And I think when you bring it down into the issues of productivity and cost, then that brings us almost full circle in our conversation where we start, and that is around maybe the technologies and how they're changing. And I know it's something you mentioned there in terms of the property awards that there are a number of categories there that reflect that. But just maybe before we move on to those categories and to go through them, just give us maybe an update or an overview, say in terms of the state of construction technology across your membership in 2025? Because the construction industry is always criticized for being a laggard in terms of technology. And what I would suggest from my experience over the last number of years, that I'm seeing that we're seeing some really fast adopters. We're seeing some great innovation. And more worryingly for me is that maybe the gap between those who are really embracing technology and doing it well and leveraging it to achieve those productivity and to try manage costs. There's a big gap between those who are doing it very well and maybe those who have yet to start. And my worry always is the gap widening to the extent that we're going to lose people who've been in the industry for decades and sometimes for generations because they're not able to cross that gap. So can you give us maybe maybe update us on across your membership, where are we in terms of technology adoption?
Look, we're actually in a very good place, and we're actually quite advanced as an industry in Ireland. And I think that's shown in the fact that many pharmaceuticals, high tech companies, data centers come here and take us abroad with them throughout their other jurisdictions and their international business. So that's a testament to what we do. Um, Productivity needs to be split out between the pre-construction phase and the post-construction phase. We have to look at, generally speaking, Irish contractors are very efficient once they hit site. They get things done, and you could say the same thing about house builders. Once they're let on the site, those houses generally go pretty quick. So do the schools and so forth, right? It's usually the pre-construction phases that causes a lot of delays. But the technology, like people call it modern medicine construction. We've been doing off-site construction and manufacturing for decades. Timber frames, for example, came in, many, many years ago. We're doing 2D and 3D. Now, the 2D is more like steel gauge and light steel gauge systems. You've got pods, you've got mechanical electrical systems that come in and are literally bolted in and into the structure and the substructure of the building. Facades, glazing systems, curtain walling systems. They're all off-site and they're assembled. They're all manufactured off-site and assembled. We need to see more data from the manufacturing of construction-related materials, goods, systems carried across into the construction productivity data to see that we are doing this. And it's evident across the board in how we build. So we're in a very good place. There are many contractors that are now looking at construction from a lean perspective. They look at the process and they say, okay, what's repetitive? What can we standardize? What can we automate from a digitalization perspective, which is capturing data across the board? But it's also then looking at, well, could we use precast for this instead of traditional block? And once they start analyzing their processes and their systems, they start to be able to adopt new technology. And that's the challenge for smaller, medium-term enterprises. They are chasing cash flow. They're running from one project to the next, and whatever the client is demanding, the client is getting. Whereas clients also have a major role to play in how they decide how they want to build their projects, which must be done then during the design phase and must be costed at the design phase and designed in and specified in. So they have a big role to play in that. The contractor is there to build what they're contracted to build, which means the client has a lot of say in that, and also in how much embedded carbon is in the process. Embedded carbon is in the finished product and the value for money for the product rather than just a transactional lowest price deal.
You touched on something there that, yeah, and I know it's part of a larger conversation for another day, but you talk about, well, generally speaking, when Irish contractors, when they get on site, they're good and they're fast. And, you talked about maybe some of the contractors being brought in for data centers. And so now we're in a position where that homegrown expertise is being exported. So they're delivering more outside of Ireland than in Ireland. And again, this comes down to the policies not supporting it. So actually, there's an argument to be made that while we call for the a rapid uptake or a rapid kind of increase in productivity, I wonder if we actually got that, would the contractors essentially outgrow the Irish marketplace, the Irish processes, the limitations that we have, and end up following their colleagues who are delivering data centers everywhere but in Ireland?
Well, look, I mean, the data center market is obviously shifting. We probably won't be as accelerating the construction of data centers in Ireland as much as we were. However, those existing data centers will probably move into refurb because you'll have the whole way of implementing AI and how those networks are going to have to be refurbished or redeveloped. Those data centers are going to be built based on AI systems. So that's probably an area that's going to involve Irish contractors anyway. But like the thing about Irish contractors growing abroad and when it's productivity based, like when you move to new forms of technology and delivery, you create new jobs. If you're going more off-site, that means more labor is going into a manufacturing facility in a more fixed location. But you still have to have assembly and guys and boots on the ground, as they say. But what you'll see is less craft labor on site and more in manufacturing facilities. But you'll see assembly and literally, if you like, it becomes much more of a Lego, a military process on site of pulling these things together. So you get a shift. But at the same time, what happens is you then have a much more of a necessity for inspections, for quality control, for data analytics, for data monitoring and measurement as you're building with these systems. Because if you get it wrong on the manufacturing side, it's going to go very badly on site. It has to be done once. As they say, you measure twice and you cut once with this type of stuff. So the roles and all shift. But the challenge is that the industry has the capacity, provided, and the capability, provided one, the government continue to maintain counter-cyclical, multi-annual funding for the industry to give them certainty and continuity work so they can plan the resources and their people. You need to look at the industry and say we need to work in partnership and we need to manage the risk and deal with construction in a logistics risk management approach with partners. And reform, that means reform is necessary. Reform of procurement processes and reform of the public works contract. That's where we get better, more public housing delivered. That's where we get more roads built, more transportation. And all that is underpinned then by reform and implementation of the Planning Act and the Planning Bill, the National Planning Framework.
Paul, we might pick this conversation up again in about 3 weeks when we expect to have sight of the programme for government, when we expect to know a little more and where we can actually see what the ambitions of the incoming government are, particularly across the region. So we'll definitely pick this conversation up again. But I do want to return to the National Property Awards because, as I mentioned, you are joining the judging panel along with myself. I'm grandfathered in at that stage at this stage, but the judging panel is chaired by Tina Marie O'Neill, editor of the Property Plus section of the Business Post. And this year we're going to be joined by Neil Bannon, Executive Chairman of Bannon, who most people will be well familiar with across the retail market in Ireland. Catherine Kenny, CEO of Dublin Simon Community, will be joining again this year. And I know that it has been a big year for the Simon Community and in terms of the number of people that they've helped. But I would imagine that Catherine will have an opinion about what the incoming government can do as well. You know, we talked about calling the housing crisis, I'm sure for the team in the Simon Community, they probably, it has probably lost all meaning of the term crisis. We've been throwing it around so long. So I'm looking forward to seeing how she will approach some of the entries and some of the initiatives that have been going on. Also this year, we're going to be joined by Gavin Lawler, President of the Irish Planning Institute. So again, so much of what we've touched on today, and to be honest, every week on this show, comes back to planning. And, you know, we've said it before, but planning is not just a problem, it's kind of the problem at the moment. So again, really keen to see what the planning industry, you know, because there has been a lot happening in terms of planning. So it feels like we're maybe not moving at the pace we want to move, but we are going in the direction that we want. And surely going in the direction has to be the right first step, and maybe then we look to accelerate that pace. And also this year, returning to the judging panel will be Mary Conway, chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association. So again, a very important voice to capture from around Ireland. And Genevieve McGurk, head of operations with IPAV. So capturing the views of nearly 1,700 auctioneers and valuers from around the country. So there's a really good, solid judging panel there that's across planning, construction and real estate, not just across the urban centres, but for rural Ireland as well. So very excited about that. And let's take a moment, I know we have to wrap up shortly, but let's take a moment to just reflect on some of the categories, because every year the categories kind of have a bit of a shake up. And this year we're really excited to see the best ESG sustainability initiative. You touched on it there, Paul, the importance of your members, when they're tendering, it's not just a case of saying the right words. They have to be able to calculate the figures in terms of sustainability. And that's been a real challenge at the moment. I know the Irish Building Council have done a lot of work, but how are your members navigating sustainability in terms of working to the metrics? Are they in a position to do that now?
The industry, as you know, is quite fragmented. I mean, you do
Mm.
have a number of quite large construction contractors and house builders that have moved in this direction quicker and adapted quicker than others. But when you do drop down very quickly below, say, the top 50, 60 contractors in the country, you do get quite fragmented. And those companies struggle. So the CIF set up our ESG subcommittee. And what we're trying to do is help our members navigate the whole CSRD reporting requirements,
Mhm.
double materiality, looking at ways to do that life cycle costing assessments and so forth. So we're trying to support our members, and we have a dedicated resource page on our website which provides guides on all this type of thing. And the CIF has also went and launched the first ever carbon calculator for the industry, and we're seeing the entire supply chain, both from developers, contractors, SMEs actually starting to use this, and it's free for
Brilliant.
CIF members.
Yeah.
And it's very good because it helps you to do your not only your I think it's your scope 1, 2, and 3, so you can actually collate information on your supply chain and feed that back up to those higher in the food chain, I suppose, to speak. So that's all very positive. That's what we're trying to do. I think the whole area of ESG is really critical in the sense that, if you're going to reduce your embedded carbon, it's not the construction phase that matters. It's how you design it and how it's
Mm.
going to operate over its life cycle. And
Yeah.
often we kind of get lost in, well, you know, the funder comes along, wants to transfer as much risk as possible to the contractor, get it done for as low as price possible, and then they're left with a building that's costing a fortune to run and it's not really sustainable. And you're having investors in the property and pension schemes coming in going, where do we want to put our money? But we want to make sure we're investing in properties that are going to give us, good operational savings, but at the same time, they're also meeting ESG guides and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important, and that's what I'm kind of looking forward to see some of the entries to showcase how they're doing that.
Yeah,
Um,
and to be fair, the quality of entries is very strong, and it has been consistently strong over the past number of years. So we actually do get to see that level of detail, that information, because certainly I remember kind of 7, 8 years ago when people were putting forward their sustainability credentials, there was a lot of ambition there, and ambition was an important place to start, or a lot of aspiration, but we weren't really able to follow through. We weren't able to see those metrics, and that's really how that's changed. Some of the other categories actually that I think that essentially this will overlap with are the one you mentioned there, renovation and redevelopment or
yep,
repurposing, because that's going to be, I think, a continuing theme for 2025.
yep,
I'm excited to see the developer of the year because I think we've seen some really, really exciting developments going on. I'm biased. I'm always excited to see the marketing team and the social media campaigns. But this year we're going to have a placemaking initiative. And I think placemaking is one where I can see that your members are really getting more involved in placemaking. So it's gone so much more beyond the building now to the public realm, in terms of biodiversity of the landscaping. We're just seeing a real shift in that. So I'm
and
excited.
and that's like you'd hope to see that developer year somebody has integrated all those moving parts. They've looked at modern methods of construction, and so they call it, or offsite manufacturing,
Mm.
how they've integrated that into their design process, the construction process. At the same time, they're looking at how do we make sure that we're keeping embodied carbon as low as possible, and then how are we working with the supply chain, how are we supporting them
Yeah,
in trying to bring them on the journey with them to deliver on those things. But at the same time, at the end of the day, they're also delivering a product that's giving them return on their investment, and that's the real critical thing. And maybe you go back to when you look at all the categories and the different people on the judging panel, what you've got is those four strands of aligning the infrastructure with the funding, with the land, and with the ability to actually build the product. And whether that's housing or commercial, office space, hotels, or manufacturing facilities, or plants, or technical pharmaceutical plants, it's those four strands. And as an industry, we need to get them right. Planning is an element on the way to delivering it. So it's just a systematic problem that we need to
yeah,
solve, or a systematic challenge that will be
yeah.
solved eventually, but we probably need to do a bit quicker than we are.
Well, I think you touched on it there. The reality is that so many of these projects that we need to deliver that underpin a lot of the housing delivery of all types and tenures that we need. Some of these projects are larger than the lifespan of any single government, and that has been a consistent problem. But look, there are many reasons to be hopeful, and actually, just in light of our conversation, I've just realised that the PropTech there's actually two PropTech awards this year. There's PropTech of the Year, and then there's the Emerging PropTech Company Award, which we're so excited because this is where we get to see the people who are innovating and still trying stuff. But just to point out to anybody listening that the PropTech Award and the Emerging PropTech Award, that covers PropTech and construction technology. So if there's anybody innovating their construction tech product, we would definitely love to hear from them, because I think that's a really exciting one, and it may well overlap with sustainability sustainability initiative and innovation. So it'll be interesting to see. I suppose finally, Paul, as an incoming judge for the awards, what's the one thing that you'd really like to see across the applications?
I think it's that whole life cycle approach towards the asset. You know, it's certainly to demonstrate that you're taking that long-term view on what the asset's going to do in 50 years' time. And not necessarily trying to get it out delivered to get your return on your investment. It's that holistic approach to investment. And you said it's that impact on biodiversity, it's impact on communities, it's impact on the transportation system, the schooling system. How does that property development integrate into our society and our economy, and provide support for FDI and jobs, and the bigger ecosystem that surrounds property and our built environment?
Yeah, I think that's infinitely sensible. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today. I look forward to seeing you at our judging day, and indeed at the gala event at the Intercontinental at the end of February, where we'll be celebrating the very best projects and initiatives and companies delivering for Ireland across planning, construction, and property, and of course technology. So thank you so much. That's all we've time for today. That was Paul Sheridan, Director of Main Contracting and Civil Engineering Services within the CIF. My thanks as always to producer Katie Tallon and to the Hear Me Roar Media team on sound. Finally, thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next Property Roundup here on iProperty Radio with myself, Carol Tallon. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other construction and real estate shows here on iPropertyRadio.com.